Hello, welcome to the FreeSoul podcast. We have with us Jorge Quintana, one of the FreeSoul Poetry Contest winners, and just a wonderful poet. I met you, I believe, doing slam over at Luna's. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And powerful poetry. Like the first time you came in, usually I'm used to people when I meet them, uh, especially like for poetry competitions and such, like a little warm-up period, but the moment you hit stage, I was like, this person has a presence and a voice to them, and I'm so happy that you were able to submit to this, because like, yeah, I'm just excited to share your work with more people. But
No. Yeah, I remember that slam, and let it all be also be said that the closest I got to a slam was it came down to the final round, and I was facing off against you, and I have to go up against David. I was like, all right, how am I gonna beat him? So I brought out my best poem. I was like, okay, that was solid. And then you come out with I want to be sexy poem. I was like, oh, I lost. As soon as that poem came out, I was like, oh, it's over. It's over.
There's devious plans that you go into when planning for a slam, and that's a poem that I'm like, if any of my poetry is gonna kill, it's gonna be that one, because
Yeah.
just people, as was said, I used to do improv. And as a friend of mine said when I was learning the ropes of how to do it, I was like, what do the audience want? And they said, they just want to see a big man move. I'm like, that's fair. So there's a whole part of the poem where I shake my butt. It's actually on my YouTube channel, just to plug myself, I guess, in a weird way. Operation FreeSoul on YouTube. But this isn't about me. This is about you. I'm wondering, Jorge, what's been your exposure with poetry in the past? Because I don't know a lot about you, and I've been curious to get to know you for a while. And what a great excuse to get to know you. So, uh, yeah, just give us like a little bit of your history with poetry and spoken word.
So my history with poetry, it started as a kid. It started as just an interest with a girl and wanting to write her one love poem to just say, hey, I like you and I want you to like me. And that was the first poem I ever wrote. It was a love note.
Mm.
And the poem was, roses are red, violets are blue. I love flowers, but not as much as you. And I remember I gave it to her friend. I folded it up all nice, gave it to her friend. I remember I watched her friend carry it over to her. And this was like across the entire playground. So I'm watching this happen from afar. It was so dramatic. And I remember her reading the poem. I remember her crumbling it up, and I remember her throwing it away. And that was the day a poet was born. Yeah.
Oh no! Oh
That's how it went down. That was my, but
wow!
it doesn't end there, because see, what ended up happening was
Mhm.
her friend ended up coming over saying, hey, sorry. And I remember just looking at her friend. I remember she smiled. And that's when, I kind of fell in love with her friend, and I realized there was always someone to love. And I started writing.
Wait, time out. No. We're
So
not brushing past this. We're not brushing past this. You wrote a love poem for a girl. How old were you? How old were you?
I was in third grade. I was 9.
Third grade player writes a poem for a girl, and then her friend
Can't
likes
count
it.
as a player when I'm getting protected. And yeah, and it just went down that way. And I started writing. I got into hip hop in middle school. Started writing poetry with a friend, and it wasn't until my senior year in high school that I performed for the town show. I performed for people for the first time,
Mm.
and it was that rush. It was that anxiety, that fear, that my heart was beating so fast on the stage, and that's how I knew it was for me. And then when I found Luna's, it was just finding other people that felt that way. And ever since then, I started performing.
Yeah, and so was Luna's other, well, actually, with hip hop, what's that's a whole avenue I didn't even know you had gotten into at all. Um, where have you performed at before, like Luna's? Oh. You still there?
David, I think it froze a
Oh,
little bit.
yeah. Can you
Oh
hear me?
goodness. It's
Testing. You there? Hello?
okay. Okay, there we go.
Oh,
Okay, back.
perfect.
Um, I heard the question, but then it just kind of like froze up. So yeah, so hip hop started in middle school. I started rapping, writing lyrics. I still do that to this day, but with poetry. I have like a spoken word hip hop kind of style that I post on my YouTube channel.
What's your YouTube channel? Let them
And
know.
Jorge Quintana. Um, it's nothing specific, so it can be kind of hard to find me. But if you follow me on Instagram at Jorge Quintana Poetry, I have links to all my social media.
I'll make sure to link
so
it
I
too.
have a yes, please. And so I have a spoken word hip hop style because I like getting on a beat, and when it just hits, I love being able to rhyme to it, not just poetically, but using hip hop tropes, themes, rhyme schemes. I love hip hop. I mean, obviously, as I started with more mainstream artists, but for me, the artists that really have just influenced where I want to go. I like Immortal Techniques. I like Atmosphere. I like I like Del the Funky Homo Sapien.
Ah,
I
yeah.
like oh man, storytellers are they just hit. They just hit.
100%. And that those influences really ring out in your poetry. Like if you haven't seen his work, if you haven't heard the man, seriously, I'll have the links. They'll be below or wherever information goes on whatever website you're watching this on. And yeah, make sure you check him out. Now you went from, so we talked about you at 9 years old with love poetry, and we've talked about you now. There's a whole middle section of how did you go from roses are red, violets are blue for cute girls that you see, to being this amazingly powerful poet who does this poem about like society and loss and grief.
I think that in high school, my poetry was very emo, very depressing, it was a lot about, trigger warning, suicide, thoughts, pertaining to that, to me feeling ugly, me feeling hideous, me wanting to just end my life. I actually had a whole thing with myself, especially being undocumented. I just felt like I would turn 18 and my life would just go to shit. I felt like, what am I going to do? Like the only thing that's keeping me active in society is school, public school, where I told myself, I was like, well, I guess that when I turn 18, I guess I'm just gonna have to kill myself, because otherwise, what am I gonna do after that? There's nothing for me. And my poetry really reflected that. It was very dark. It was very, you could tell it came from a space of self-hate. And in fact, I actually threw away that poetry book because I couldn't open it or look at it anymore. And so come college, and I started learning about myself. I started learning about my community. I started learning about the world. I came into this space where I realized that what I really hated about myself was the things that couldn't fit in to the society I was trying to live in. I realized I hated myself for not being able to fit in. And so my poetry now comes from a place of my spiritual journey and teaching me that I have my own space in the universe. And that space means that I don't relate to the right or the left. I don't relate to any groups. I'm here to be a true individual. And so a lot of my poetry, I just try to carry that love of saying, hey, we are all individuals at our core. And even though some of us may gravitate to groups or societies, villages, clans, at the end of the day, we are all having an individual experience, and it is worth knowing about.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And
thank you.
When you talk about being undocumented and not fitting in, I was wondering if you could give us a little more of a glimpse into what that looks like, because that's something that I hear a lot. And my father is a refugee to this country from Cuba. I know he definitely had a long time of not being able to feel like he fit in. But for you, what was that experience? What did that experience look like?
When you learn to hide, one thing I've learned about the different undocumented people, and also people who have immigrated and are at different stages of their naturalization, of becoming citizens, there's this sense of hiding, of some of us who feel like we're not seen, and then others who purposely do not want to be seen. One of the rhetoric in immigrant movements, it's this whole idea of coming out of the shadows. And so for me, the way it manifested is I learned to be perfect. smile, right? Charming smile, polite, eye contact, firm handshakes, always knowing what to say, always the top grades, making sure I was successful. I had this fear of failure where I remember in high school, there's people that say, oh man, like you're going to become president and this and that. And it was like a lot of people had high expectations of me, but I didn't really know if I could meet them. And it's a big thing. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Was there any?
Oh no, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Was there any kind of fear that if you met them, people might find out?
Yeah. So it was like, well, I appreciate that you think I can become president, but I can't. People that would say, don't forget me when you're famous. But I'm like, well, how am I going to become famous? So yeah, it was a fear of, well, what happens when you find out? I remember there was this wrestler at my school who it was this quote where he was like, oh, don't forget me when you're famous. And then down below that, he replied, oh, like, would you forget me if I don't become famous? You know, don't forget me if I don't become famous. And it's safe to say a lot of the people said to me, forgot me, which is okay. People move on with their lives. But there was this fear of being seen. What happens if I tell people I'm undocumented, and, you know, how do they react?
And that's a whole existence that so much of America doesn't even get exposed to in the slightest. We just get like little glimpses every now and then when CNN decides to talk about it for, 5 minutes and then cuts away to whatever else is going on in the news. But actually, on that note, in terms of our poetry scene, I don't know how much of the poetry scene here in Sacramento you've really been able to experience, but assuming that you had a bit like Beyond Lunas, is that correct? I should ask that first.
Yes. I performed the different, yes.
So, or else this question doesn't make any sense to you. On the topic of like inclusivity, for me as someone who's Cuban and Mexican, and my family has roots in Mexico City and Camagüey, Cuba, in this city, even though so much of the population is Latinx or Latina or Latino, as some people might put it, I find it hard to find open mics where I feel like there are other people like me who like I could talk about my experience and have them go like, oh yeah, I know what that's like. And I was wondering, I mean, if you felt the same way, but also just like what it's like for you going into a space here in Sacramento.
One thing that I love about Sacramento is, and this is what I tell people, Sacramentans mind their own business, really. Like one thing I found is people in Sacramento don't really have time to care about other people, you know, like obviously if they come to a venue to listen to poetry, they're there. But more than anything, one thing I found is people just kind of mind their business out and about. In terms of like the poetry scene, I think that as spoken word artists, we're in we are in an art medium where political poetry is really big and it's popular. In fact, I found that in poetry slams, when I did love poetry over political poetry, I tended to do worse in scores. And I would say that the city of Sacramento is as diverse as it is. There's so much love, but yeah, it is hard to find people that can directly relate to your experiences. I think that in Sacramento, there's like two kinds of poetry. There is an older, more American, more Eurocentric kind of style. It's more page-based, and I found that I can enjoy it, but my style of poetry doesn't quite fit in. It feels like it's like air trying to be kept in a cup. And then with spoken word, I have run into the issue where I don't quite fit in there either, because there's kind of people going out there. I know there's like one of the best advice I got. I don't know. I don't know if it was Shonaf or I forgot who it was, but they're like, don't pimp yourself out for a 10. You know, don't bring out all that emotional trauma just to get good scores, because that's kind of what tends to happen. You have people that go up there and perform some really deep personal, you know, things. You can tell like as they're performing, it's like they're draining themselves.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like something Ike Torres would say. That sounds like a definite Ike Torres kind of.
It might have been Ike. I know it was one of them. It was a poetic elder, someone who with that knowledge and experience said, "Don't pimp yourself out for a 10."
Yeah. Because in the end, it's just not worth it. Like for those of you who don't know how slam works, let me break it down really quick. It is 3 to 4 rounds of poetry typically, and you get up to 3 minutes per poem, no props or anything like that. And the long and short of it is you have 5 judges who are chosen randomly from the audience, and you take off the top score, you take off the bottom score, and you just keep the middle 3, add them up, that's your score for the round. It's not worth it to hunt for 10s because the validation that you're looking for is meaningless. It is 5 random people who most of them probably don't even know what poetry is, especially since slam in Sacramento is such a small scale thing for the moment. We're trying to build it up, and it has been getting bigger, but then COVID hit, of course. But
Yeah.
It's just not worth it to hunt for a 10, because in the end, you leave the event feeling like crap. And there are so many people who burnt themselves out hunting for 10s in this scene and other scenes, just because they wanted that momentary hit of validation of like, I won a slam because I had to rip myself open. I think the real challenge of slam is, can you win without having to bleed all over the place and, you know, needing proverbial ER, emergency room treatment from best friends and late night phone calls? Like, can you win without that?
Yes.
Yeah. And as someone who's relatively new to slam, you mentioned something very interesting that people, they tend to not catch on to for a little bit, which is the fact that political commentary tends to win over with then love poetry. It depends on where you go to, depends on the night, depends on the audience. But why do you think that is here in Sacramento?
I think that this is a city. I mean, California wasn't always blue. This has there's a large history of Republican conservative politics, especially in Sacramento. Yeah. Sacramento is, I mean, all the big PACs, big political organizations, and here is Sacramento, because this is the capital of the 6th largest economy of the world. The political power here is, I mean, there's a big weight politically, and at the same time, it's very diverse as a city. I know that, I mean, people talk about Sacramento being so small that you constantly run into people you know, but at the same time, if you go to Southside, let's say you're on Florent, let's say you're on Power, and then just take Power up, or take Watt, from South Watt, where I live, all the way up to Rio Linda. The same road, you pass through so many, the city's so big, there's so many different places. And because of that, I think that you have one thing I love in Sacramento is the art. There's people here with so many stories, and especially because Sacramento, it also becomes home to, for example, a lot of the people that immigrated out of the Bay because of all the taxes going up, a lot of people who move up from Southern California. So it just becomes a hub for so many different people with so many different experiences. And I think where we all kind of intersect is economically and politically, where, I mean, you see the homelessness rising, you know, you see people being evicted, you see the way this pandemic put people out of business. And that's something growing up in Sacramento, it's what you see. And I think Luna's, or just any poetry place, has been, or any open mic really in the city, has been a great opportunity for people to just voice how they feel. And so I think as a whole, political poetry and political commentary does well, because we all have these feelings within us. We've all dealt with some form of prejudice, of some form of harassment, of some kind of traumatic experience in our life, that when we hear a poet vocalize what we feel inside, it's just one of those, yes, yes. And as a country, we are also in a very tumultuous kind of, I mean, I mean, going a little historical here, but the United States has never been a calm place. From the time you had the colonies being built, there was always a fear of Great Britain, fear of these indigenous people, quote unquote savages. Then you expand westward, there's always an obstacle. There's a European power, then there's Mexico, then you finally take over the country, and there's communists, and there's world wars, and there's always fear. The American attitude is very much, this is mine, this belongs to me, and no one can take it away. There's always a fear of losing something. And you build that up through the decades. And now we're in a digital age where we can see these injustices happening in every corner of the world. We are very politically inclined, especially with the last presidency, where there's always been bigots in office, both Democrat and Republican.
Yeah.
But we finally had one who was not afraid to admit it and to put it in people's faces. A lot of people were radicalized during the last presidency. And so political poetry carries all of that, and that's why people tend to love to hear it.
That is a full answer. If you didn't catch all that, you need to hit the rewind button. Go back and listen to that again. Yeah, there's so much to take from that. First of all, the point that you made about America basically always being able to make an enemy as being a focal point, and really, it's always felt like to me like instead of ever looking into itself, that's the first thing it does, and so it makes enemies, and it never addresses itself, and then it makes enemies. And you look at how Cuba still has the embargo, and it got worse under Donald Trump, even though they haven't been a legitimate threat to anybody since we ruined them the first time. And
if anything, their medical system has been a great help to the entire world. But
yeah, and even despite all of this, like the fact that they've increased the embargo and Venezuela still isn't assisting them, and they still have, what was it, 2 vaccines that are in late stage trials out of 5. That's just surreal to me, that given all their disadvantages and all the oppression under America, or the United States. I'm trying to be better about saying the United States, not America. Not that Canada doesn't have its own separate problems as well, but yeah, talk about this country.
Yeah.
And there's so much to take from what you said. I feel like, would you rather be writing love poetry, or would you rather be writing political poetry? Because the answer to your question a little bit ago it had a tinge of bitterness that I don't blame you for having if it's there in the first place, but I don't put words in your mouth.
Oh, it definitely is bitterness, but there is resentment. Absolutely. I think it's not bitterness anymore, but there was resentment at some point, mainly because I think that as we all, well, I speak from my spiritual journey. Anyone that begins a spiritual journey, when you address yourself that you're not just this physical vessel, but there is something within you, there is a spark of life within you that is shared amongst the world, that there is an energy in common. When you begin to open to yourself to the world, and I myself have studied Taoism, Hermeticism, chaos magic. I like to learn about different things. One of the big things that I landed on was what's called depolarization. So to be polarized is to belong to one group of another. Is to say, I hate the Yankees, I'm hardcore Red Sox. It's to say, I'm Democrat over Republican. One of the paths that a lot of chaos magicians must go through, especially as you know the Kabbalah and you're learning about all these different works, it's to be depolarized, to come to the center. If you're into tarot, this is what the high priestess represents. There's the good, the bad, the white, the black, the left, the right, but it's about being in the middle. And when you come into the middle, you can't relate to either group. And I think that in my development, I went from being an activist and community organizer, very polarized. And it's something I don't talk about often because it's tough, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Guess what? Activists become bigots as well. Activists become prejudiced as well. And a lot of circles, by trying to fight racism aggressively, you end up forming your own form of bigotry. You become intolerant. There was activists who couldn't see a Republican in any way, shape, or form, or they would just lose their, like people talk about Karens. There are activist versions of that. I became that. I became very hateful towards the police, hateful towards the government, just hateful and bitter. And when I started this spiritual journey, I realized I have to let that go because the universe is chaotic. Things are going to happen. And people always wonder, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Guess what? Bad things happen and good things happen. It's on us, the individual, to take what's happened in your life and learn to accept it, which is hard. It's hard. Yeah. And so as I started that, I realized, well, yeah, me being undocumented, it's a social condition. That's what Yosemite Reyes said. Undocumented is not an identity. It's a social condition. Racism, all these different things are social conditions that exist on purpose. And I just couldn't relate to a lot of these different rhetorics and activism anymore. I couldn't relate to this idea of political poetry is beautiful. And I respect people who get out there and share their emotions and with these words, but I just couldn't write it. I couldn't, it's not true to me because and this is why it's difficult, because there is very much colonization. There's genocide exists on purpose. Racism exists on purpose. Police brutality, all this exists on purpose. It was designed this way. And at the same time, as spirits, as creators, that spark within us, it's a creative spark. We can create the world as we live in it. We can co-create. So I would say I prefer love poetry. There's poetry about loving the human, because I prefer, when I'm on stage or when people are listening to me, I want you to feel love. I want you to feel like I love you. I want my words to inspire you. I don't want to inspire bitterness or hate or, this idea of fuck the police in you. I want to inspire you to love yourself. So in that moment that you listen to me spit my poems, I just want you to feel love and nothing else.
God, that speaks so much to just that hits a perspective that I've been on for a little while, which is you can't, like, if I yell at you and go, Jorge, I want you to change. You're a bad person. You need to change everything. You're not going to respond to that. What you're going to respond to is if I show you love and the kindness that you really are wanting within you, and then you see that in me, and that's what will bring about the change.
Yes.
Yeah. I've never heard the term, what was it, chaos magic?
Chaos magic? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had never heard that before. And I love the juxtaposition of when you first said it, what went through my head versus as you were explaining it, really being centered and being able to find your peace within the chaos rather than letting the chaos into you. That's kind of what I took from it personally.
Yeah, but chaos magic, Wicca, ritual magic, all kind of share, very similar. But yeah, chaos magic itself is the way you have to practice it is you can't have morals. You got to kind of let a lot of things go. It's a very gray area. There's no right or wrong. Yeah.
Now, so in terms of a thing that you mentioned in terms of people being radicalized, right and left, how do I put this? How do you combat things like police brutality if you're focused on staying in the middle from your perspective?
So for me, it's the way, it's not about combating it, but it's about how can I, as a spirit, reach out to another spirit and say, hey, we're in this together. I'm here with you. I'm here. This is one very thing about the heart of the shaman. To have a heart of a shaman, you must feel with the people. You can't be stone cold like I once was. I went 10 years without crying. That is not a shaman. That is a man afraid to feel. To be a shaman, to have that heart of a shaman, it's not about being fearless. It's about fearlessly feeling. It's okay to feel scared as long as you allow yourself to feel that without anything holding you back. It's about, if someone goes through something difficult and traumatic, and I've had friends open up to me about very traumatic things. It's not about saying, we need to do this to bring you justice, or we need to do that, or me avenging you. It's saying, hey, come here. Let me just hug you and let me just hold you. Let's be vulnerable and share this pain together. Healing is a lifetime journey. And so when there's stories every day of spirits who are killed by police, of humans who experience such traumatic things. And I stopped asking myself, why does this happen? And instead I asked myself, if a spirit comes to me with this kind of trauma, how can I be of service? Every day I pray and I always tell God, I'm here to walk your path and I'm here to be in service to you. That means that when someone comes to me for advice, I give it to them for free. That means that when someone needs something, I don't look to charge for my services or anything like that. I say, how can I help? So that's how I personally like it. I like grassroots. I like community. I like reaching out human to human, not setting up a big organization to work with politicians. Other people have done that and failed. I prefer to just talk person to person, heart to heart.
Ooh. There's so much that can be said for that, because if you're focusing on the normal person, they have a voice in what's going on in the world. And if you could spread that like a good grassroots movement that could spread out, you'll naturally change the politicians.
Exactly.
You'll see things naturally change over time. Yeah, that sounds like long-term change. I feel like people nowadays tend to get hooked up onto short-term. I want to hear the change right now, or
Yeah,
else it's not real change.
exactly.
When in reality, it's the other way around. It's long-term change takes time. Real tangible change is something that takes generations of unlearning awful behaviors and racist antics and
Yes.
sexist thoughts and such. And that's the that's the part that feels shitty to
Yeah.
say out loud, because I
Hmm.
want to be like, we could fix this all right now, and that is the goal. That would be
Yeah.
lovely if we could fix it right now. The cold reality is that it takes time.
Yes.
But I think the key that people tend to lose track of is the fact that it's not okay that it exists right now. That's not an excuse for it existing right now, but it is the reality, and you can't let that dishearten you from the path.
Exactly.
To be too preachy about it.
No, it's true, and this is something that I learned. I guess you could say the hard way, where it was to be a healer,
Mm.
you must open your heart to the world, and when you do that, you experience so much pain, so much pain. For me, what breaks my heart is the kids, especially as an immigrant, the kids that immigrate here by themselves. For me, that's why I do it. The kids, all the ones that died alone, I feel them. I carry them with me every day, and it's it's painful. It's painful work. It hurts every day. There is a weight to it. And that's why the shaman must be fearless. That's why the healer, any of us, any of you people who are out there, whether you're a counselor, whether you're a teacher, whether you're whatever it is, if anything you do involves talking to a person and listening, empathizing, that is the good work. That is what I consider the highest path possible. Just listening to people.
It's such a hard thing for some people to do, and I hope that uh, I just hope that people learn how to listen more. That's yeah. You've said so many beautiful things. I appreciate the hell out of you. We are kind of winding down here. I am wondering, because we have your YouTube with Jorge Quintana. Um, is there a website? I can't remember from the first
Yes,
bit.
JorgeQuintanaPoetry.com.
That's the one. And I just want to make sure that people know that, so they can go out there, see
Yes,
more of
please.
what you're doing. The first time I saw you on stage, I was just very much, I was impressed with your poetry, of course, but your presence of self. I tend to be a good read on people, and you struck me, and have always struck me as someone who is very down to earth, and I appreciate that, especially in spoken word and slam, where people could be over the top. And yeah, you were just very much yourself in any situation. And I
Thank you.
appreciate that. I
I appreciate
appreciate
it.
you. And yeah, thank you so much for being on here. It's
Of
been great.
course. It's been an honor to just share this space with you. And yeah, I think just seeing you perform, seeing Ike perform, seeing, Kaya perform, seeing all the folks at Luna's, and then being able to compete against y'all and actually be able to compete against y'all. Because when I showed up, I lost all the points in slam. I could not slam, but then learning from y'all and being able to be like, all right, that was immense, and just growing as a person.
Yeah, and no joke. So yeah, thank you again. We'll be cutting off here. If you're at home and you have some thoughts and you have some feelings that you want to put down based on anything you heard, go ahead and put it in the comments. But most importantly, make sure you're taking care of yourself. All right, take care.